Hello, welcome to Advanced Editing Quick Start. Something to save a bit of time figuring some things out, especially if you're moving from Express editing. The Nero how-to videos I viewed on YouTube focus on particular editing scenarios. What I haven't come across is something to help a person familiarize themselves with Nero's advanced editing mechanisms, which can really be problematical the first few times one edits in advanced editing. I remember getting stuck trying to figure out how to do something, which gizmos to use and where they were docked. I eventually figured it out after a bit of time and frustration. I'm thinking others might benefit from those experiences. Everything here can be found in the manual, clicking on Help, or be deduced from other YouTube editing examples that are editing for content. After the actual Nero stuff, I'll, depending upon the time, present some things that I found useful outside of Nero to help enhance my editing with Nero. I'm using Nero 12 on Windows 10. I've looked at many how-to videos, and depending upon the age, various releases of Nero are used. It does, though, appear that the basic design of the editing screens hasn't changed all that much. So this should be useful for not only Nero 12, but later releases. I'm starting out with an Express editing project so you can see what happens when we change to advanced editing. Just have a couple of scenes that I pull down, the blowing flower, add a black and white special effects, some titles, some transitions. But I also add a slow-mo function to the second scene because I want you to know what happens. And what happens primarily is the audio goes away, gets detached and goes away. And you'll also notice that when I play it, it's choppy. I have an old computer, so it can bring it to its knees very quickly. But since this situation can occur in both Express and Advanced Editing, I'll show you how to address it now. Go to More, go to Configure, in Application Setting, go to Editing, and enable Nero Background Rendering. This will allow Nero to work on the video in the background, so when you finally play it, you won't bring your computer to its knees, at least not like it did before. Safe Area is another function that spans modes. Go to the tools just below the preview area and select Safe Mode. It adds two lines to the preview area. The outer line is what is safe for most televisions. The inner line is like absolutely safe. There's a overscan in television, and if you notice, the filter for 70s TV actually crops the image to the outer line. And now to the meat of this video, moving from Express to Advanced Editing. 3 significant changes occur. There are added tracks, and even more can be added, by the way. There's an expanded effect palette, which we'll cover after we discuss the added functions and tools. On the left, there are 2 icons. One is Lock Track, one is Hide Track. The Lock Track locks the track from participating in any editing function. For example, if you do a delete and close gap and a track is locked, all the other tracks will participate in that, but the lock track will not. The other icon, Hide Track, is essentially a logical delete of that track without actually getting rid of it. You can later re-enable it. And if you hide it, it's actually hidden throughout the whole process of editing and even into exporting if you go through the logical end. We're going to look at a few of the added tools and functions on the right. The first one is the Standard tool. It has no additional options. The Marquee tool, which actually has a pull down, if you notice, either right click on it or hold your left mouse button for a long time, and then the alternative icons will come out, and they happen to be select tracks, left, right, or all of them. Going down to the Cut tool, it can also be used, or can also bring up the Slip and the Roll tool. There are some interesting ways of handling the icon tools on the right. A lot of editors, you see, they do something with this, with the regular tool, then they go get the cutter and they do something with the cutter, then they have to go back to the Standard tool, and there's a lot of mouse movement. There's some interesting things you can do. I'm a two-handed editor, and I use one hand on the mouse and the other hand I use on the keyboard to select the various tools. Cutter tool, standard tool, the marquee tool, back to the standard tool. I don't use the slip and the roll tool, but you can. And one other one I use most often is the space bar, because if you notice it actually starts the preview window. So between right and left hand makes easier editing. The keys can be found by going down to the help icon, clicking on it, and then clicking on the keyboard shortcuts. A list of the keys will come up, and there you go. I would recommend getting the Nero Video Manual. It's not a how-to manual, it's truly a reference manual, but quite helpful. I recommend doing a web search to find it because I found links disappear, or they change, or something like that. So do a web search on it and you'll find the entries, you'll be able to download it. Returning to Express Editing mode, I want to point out the context menu. If you notice, when I right-click on a clip, depending upon what the clip is, the context menu brings up different options. Switching to advanced editing, you notice the context menu is generally larger. It's because in advanced editing you can do more. In advanced editing, the effect palette also changes. I'm going to scroll down to slow and fast motion. And if you notice, we have the original express mode effects. There's been an addition of slow and fast motion effect. This is what I call a core effect. I'm going to pull it down here so you can see what happens. It brings in another set of options. I want to make sure I point out the arrow icon to show properties. This is new in advanced mode, and what it does is give you much more control than an express mode template. You no longer need all the express mode templates because you can choose any speed you want. You can also choose how you want it to integrate into your timeline, whether or not you actually want to delete the soundtrack or just mute it for later manipulation. The next thing I want to point out, and I'm going to use scale and position to do it, are the use of keyframes. Turning on keyframes, you'll notice another set of icons appear. This allows you to navigate, going to the previous and next keyframe, and also set and delete the keyframe. Setting is automatic if you actually move a variable. Also note that you have effects track that pop up in the clips. Using the context menu on the video clip, you can show or hide the effect track. In the effect track itself, you have the option of moving around with the keyframes, but this really is a replication of using the navigation of the keyframes in the properties part of the effect palette. Keyframes are a very powerful editing tool, and my purpose was to show you how to set and navigate them, not explain the use. If you don't know how to use keyframes, you might take a look at Star Trek transporter effects. The takeaway from this, more than actually creating a Star Trek transporter effect, is the extensive use of keyframes in order to achieve this. After watching this video, you should have a good understanding how to use them in a clip. Well, it turns out that we do have some time left for helper apps. The helper apps are really apps I use to remedy deficiencies and frustrations, as well as some enhancements. The deficiencies are at least for Nero 12. First one I want to briefly mention is Wave Editor. I use it to speed up and slow down an audio clip that has been unlinked when I use the fast slow effect. The next app I use, and actually use it a fair amount, is OpenOffice Impress. This is a open software presentation app. I use it primarily to enhance title creation. I often include multiple titles throughout a clip, and I like consistency in positioning the register of where the title shows up. This definitely helps that. When I create my title, I just simply duplicate the slide. That way everything stays on register. Not to mention you have the full palette of presentation options, such as adding symbols, watermarks, pictures, and so forth. The cautions I want to point out are ratios and transparency. I set up my page for a 16:9 ratio, which is my target video, generally high-def television. I just changed the paper to 12.8 inches by 7.2 inches, which is 1280 by 720, which is 16:9. That way, when I build a title, I'll know how it looks when it's overlaid on the clip. Secondly, I like to use transparency, so just the letters overlay the clip. This one was pre-set up for none. This is transparency. Using this software, I have to save each presentation page individually. I actually have to export it. The important thing to note, and again, I think this might be common on other presentation software, is to choose the PNG format. This particular format will guarantee that you can create transparent backgrounds. Not all formats support a transparent background. PNG for sure does. The next and last helper app requires you to be somewhat of a computer nerd. The following discourse requires command prompt and batch file literacy. And I would say, even if you have such skills and you're not of the temperament to look for alternatives when you hit a wall, it's still a good place to stop. The app is FFmpeg, developed on Linux, hence its command line interface. It is cryptic and tedious, but very powerful and comprehensive. And it is pervasive, unknowingly used by many. Note the URL in the Nero license screenshot. In the context of Nero, I use it primarily to address transition anomalies and pixelation. And while not necessarily caused by, they seem to be aggravated by multiple formats, frame size and rates, container types, in particular when building a video with clips from multiple sources. So I use FFmpeg to normalize all my videos to the same characteristics. Nero Recode could probably do some of this, but I default to FFmpeg as I use it for many other functions and know it quite well. I execute FFmpeg via batch files for expediency. Subsequent re-execution of the batch file only requires minor changes, like the file name. Basically, I build a library of templates. It's easy to use. Just click on a batch file. I throw the pause command in at the end so I can interrogate all the messages that FFmpeg puts out. Watch out when FFmpeg requires a % sign. A % sign has special meanings in batch files. They have to be doubled to be passed through. I don't have enough time to explain the following 3 bat files in any great detail. I did a dry run, and I just can't shorten a detailed explanation enough to fit. So I'll just display them. And if you're interested, you can pause the video to look at them, and then check out FFmpeg's documentation. And look for examples via the internet. I use the following 3 to reverse a video clip, of course with no sound. This first one deconstructs a video clip into images. The second one reverses the order by renaming the images. The third one reconstructs them back into a clip. That's pretty much it. There's so much more to say on FFmpeg, but that's a whole other issue. I hope this entire video has been useful and good editing.